guys, I'm Heidi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of April. So first of all, I finished 2 books in Estonian, but I'm not going to talk about them here because I think I'm going to do a separate video where I'm going to talk about all the books that I've read recently in Estonian, and I think I'm going to do that video in Estonian as well. I did one back in November, I think, and I really enjoyed it, so I think I'm going to do another one. But one of those books was called põnevat lugu Eesti Vabariigist by Jaak Juske, so that's 100 exciting stories from the Republic of Estonia by Jaak Juske, which is a kind of a fun history book that talks about events from Estonian history that are relatively unknown. And the book was published to commemorate the 100th birthday of the Republic of Estonia, which was back in 2018, and it was quite an enjoyable book. And the second one was Kõik, äratatakse, ellu by Meelis Friedenthal. Everyone or Everything Will Be Brought to Life by Meelis Friedenthal. This one was a short story collection, and it had stories that had sort of fantastical, even horror-like elements. And Meelis Friedenthal is one of my all-time favorite Estonian authors, and I very much enjoyed it. But I am going to talk about those 2 books in that separate video. I also finished reading Pieces by Helen Oyeyemi. So this is a very strange story. We follow Otto and his partner Xavier and their pet mongoose as they board a train to go on their non-honeymoon honeymoon. There is something weird going on with the train. The compartments don't have numbers, they have symbols instead, and they seem to be the only passengers aboard apart from a mysterious young woman. And then they start encountering sort of other strange or weird things happening on the train. It was definitely very Oyeyemi. There was a lot of magical realism, and it was definitely a bit mad, although I think it was a bit less mad than some of her other works. It reminded me of Wes Anderson a bit in terms of the vibe. Oyeyemi is a very skilled writer. There's a lot of wit, and the storytelling is definitely vivid. It's non-linear. It's, as I said, a bit strange. But it is very enjoyable to read, and I would definitely recommend it to fans of magical realism and those who just like weird stories. I also finished reading Fugitive Telemetry by Martha Wells. This is the 6th book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and this one was a novella. So the 5th book was a full-length novel, and now the 6th one went back to the novella format. And I think the story takes place before the events of the 5th book. And again, we follow Murderbot, who is a bot-human construct who has hacked their governor module, which is designed to keep them in check, and who tries to mostly keep humans from getting themselves killed, but they would much rather just not do that because they much prefer watching soap operas instead. This one is basically a self-contained murder mystery. Murderbot discovers a dead body on preservation station, and then they have to figure out who is responsible for killing that person. The dialogue and sort of Murderbot's inner monologue was there, and it was as humorous as ever, so definitely highly recommended for anyone who likes this series. And if there is anyone out there who hasn't yet picked up the Murderbot Diaries series, then I would definitely recommend it. And I think I would definitely also recommend it for people who don't usually read science fiction, because it is very accessible. I also finished reading Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. This is the 1st book in the Tawny Man trilogy, and this trilogy is in turn part of the Realm of the Elderlings series. First of all, I would recommend anyone who is only just starting to read the Realm of the Elderlings books to do it in the right order, because it makes for a much richer experience. So I would start with the Farseer trilogy, then move on to the Liveship Traders, then the Tawny Man trilogy, then the Rainwild Chronicles, and then finally the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. The events of this book take place 15 years after the events of the Farseer trilogy, and again we follow Fitz and the Fool as main characters. And that 15-year period was sort of covered by the Liveship Traders, although it followed different characters and it had a different storyline. But still, all of these books are connected, which is why I would recommend people to read all of these in the right order, because the Tawny Man trilogy does reference the live ship traders, and it is a direct sequel to the Farseer trilogy. So it makes for a much nicer experience if you can recognize characters that show up from the live ship traders books, for example, and you have a much better understanding of the world in general. So with this book, I enjoyed coming back to Fitz and the Fool, although I did find myself missing the characters from the live ship traders a little bit, because the Live Ship Traders was absolutely brilliant. It remains one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. But I was quite happy to continue the story of Fitz and the Fool. It's kind of hard to talk about this without spoiling anything from the Farseer trilogy, but as I said, the events take place 15 years after the events of the Farseer trilogy, and I really enjoyed the character development in this book. As always, Robin Hobb does character development amazingly well. I like the fact that Fitz as a character has definitely matured. He is 15 years older, which makes sense. But he is a much more enjoyable character to read about. In the Farseer trilogy, I got frustrated with him quite a lot, but that also made sense because he was young, so he made decisions that weren't that smart, whereas in Fool's Errand he is now around 35 years old, so his sort of thought processes have definitely matured. I really liked the way Robin Hobb explored Fitz's relationship with the Fool and his relationship with Night Eyes, and a lot of the plot was centered around Fitz's relationship with Night Eyes, who is Fitz's sort of bond companion. They share a magic bond basically called the Wit, and throughout most of the book Fitz is very worried that Night Eyes is getting older, and he is very anxious about one day losing Night Eyes. So that is creating a lot of anxiety for Fitz, and I feel like that was handled very well by the author. The stakes in this were quite high. Fitz and the Fool essentially go on a rescue mission, and as a reader you are very anxious for them to succeed. The pacing was very slow as always, but I actually really enjoyed it, because it is this whole series, or this whole sort of the whole Realm of the Elderling series is very centered on character development, which is definitely what I enjoy in books. So this is overall pretty much a perfect fantasy series for me. And I'm now also currently reading The Golden Fool, which is the second book in the series, and I'm really enjoying this one as well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend anyone who hasn't read Robin Hobb yet to give it a go. I also finished reading Stalking Darkness by Lynn Flewelling. I read this as part of a read-along called Scala Long, and I enjoyed this even more than the first book. Again, we follow Alec and Sergil, who are rogues and thieves, as they go on their adventures. The stakes were definitely higher in this one, the pacing was better, and the plot was sort of darker and grittier overall. I also really enjoyed the fact that the romance was still pretty slow burn. I have a newfound appreciation for some of the side characters, and I really like the fact that Alec as a character has grown as well. He is still very young in this book, but he has obviously matured through what he has gone through, and I really enjoyed reading about that. There was quite a lot of suspense. I read the last 200 pages or so in one sitting because I could not wait to find out what was going to happen. The only thing that didn't work for me was the fact that the antagonists were almost too evil. It felt like they were doing evil things because that's what antagonists do. And the sort of country that they came from, Plenimar, just overall seemed like a very evil country full of evil people who do things just for the sake of being evil. So yeah, that didn't sound too plausible for me. But all in all, this was super enjoyable. I am also currently reading the third book in the series called Traitor's Moon, and that one is a bit different from the first two books. as far as I can tell, but I am still really enjoying that one as well, so I'm really looking forward to finishing it. I also finished reading a graphic novel in April, and that was Saga Volume 9 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. We follow Marco and Alana, who come from rival planets that are constantly at war with each other, but they end up falling in love and they have a child. And this is basically their journey and their attempts at surviving in this incredibly hostile world. I don't actually have that much to say about this. I actually went and reread the previous 8 volumes because I couldn't really remember any specifics from the previous volumes, so I really wanted to get myself back in the story before picking up this volume. And I'm glad I did. I kind of forgot how wild it actually got at times, so this is definitely a very imaginative but very explicit series. It's a bit like Game of Thrones in the sense that you shouldn't really get too attached to any of the characters because you don't know if they're going to survive. And quite a lot happened in this volume as well. There was some heavy stuff happening and it ended with a bit of a cliffhanger, so I can't wait to read the next volume. I also finished The Duchess War by Courtney Milan. This was the April pick for the Genre Raiders book club, and if it hadn't been for book club, I probably would have DNF'd it. So this is a historical romance about a young woman who has had to change her identity because of something scandalous that had happened in her past. And she ends up meeting a duke who realizes that there is a lot more to her than the quiet wallflower she is pretending to be, and the story kind of goes from there. Sadly, I didn't enjoy this much. It took me forever to read, even though it was such a short book, because it was weirdly boring. I just couldn't connect with any of the characters, and I think I expected a bit more historical accuracy as well from a historical fiction book, and it just wasn't there. It felt a bit like a bunch of 21st century people role-playing as 19th century people, because it all seemed very, very modern. The story was a bit too ridiculous and over the top for my liking, and the plot really made no sense. The romance was basically just insta-lust, and the sex scenes were so cringy. So yeah, this was definitely not for me. Having said all that, the writing itself was actually not bad. Courtney Milan can definitely write. But yeah, sadly this just wasn't for me. I think I might do better with contemporary rather than historical romance. And finally, I finished The Whole Truth by Cara Hunter. This is the 5th book in the Adam Foley series. And it is a pretty straightforward police procedural. The way the book is structured is actually quite interesting. It doesn't just tell you the story, there's a lot of other content as well. So there are newspaper articles, there are interview transcripts, there are screenshots of texts, podcasts, and other such things. So that was quite cool, I like that. And the story overall was pretty good, but not amazing. There are 2 main storylines basically. One of them follows a young woman who is found dead, and then sort of the team of Adam Foley has to figure out who killed her. And the other storyline, which I guess is the main one, is centered on a sexual assault accusation. There is a student at a university who accuses his lecturer or professor of sexually assaulting him, but the twist is that the lecturer is a very attractive woman in her 40s, and the student is a 6 foot tall, powerfully built rugby player, and he's a guy, and so this is kind of it creates an interesting situation on whether or not people believe him, and again, Adam Foley and his team have to figure out what really happened. Overall, it was quite enjoyable. There were a few plot points that didn't make much sense, and there wasn't really any wow effect when it came to the solution, but it was quite good. I don't actually have that much to say about this. I think if you usually like crime fiction and if you usually like police procedurals, then I think you would enjoy this series. I guess you can pick up any of them in any order. They are mostly self-contained stories, but they do reference characters and events and cases from previous books. But I suppose you wouldn't really miss out on much if you read these out of order. But yeah, would recommend if you usually enjoy crime and mystery books. So this is it. I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!